Hello and welcome to this week's episode of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary Podcast for People on the Go. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Hendricks College and pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm joined this and every week by my friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Robertson, biblical scholar and executive director of Congregation Beit Haverim, a synagogue in Atlanta. This week, the Narrative Lectionary finds us in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43, the story of a synagogue leader's daughter and a woman with a 12-year flow of blood. We wrestle with Jesus countering the expectation that a privileged person's needs should be addressed first, what it means that a woman receives healing from Jesus without him knowing it, and whether faith is really enough in a world marked by suffering and pain. Also, we wonder whether Jesus might have made a good fifth Beatle. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Bobby.
Hey, Amy, how are you this week?
I am doing well.
This is our last podcast as NLDR. Next week, we're going to be Bible Worm.
Yes, it is time to retire at the NLDR.
All right.
We're still in Mark 5.
We're on Mark 5. Yeah, we're just in the very next verse. So when we begin this text, we are back. We've come back from Gentile territory, and we are back in Galilee.
Yes, on the Jewish side of things.
On the Jewish side of things.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just start. Oh, by the way, so this story, Mark 5:21 through 43, this is a technique that we've seen, I think, once before of Mark's called intercalation or sandwiching, where he tells a story with another story stuck in the middle. So we've got a story that's introduced at the beginning here about a synagogue leader, which then gets finished at the end. But in the middle of telling that story, he tells a whole different story about about a woman who has a flow of blood. And so by sticking these stories together, he's creating some kind of narrative tension. But I think he's also inviting us to ponder how these two stories might be related to each other.
I also think it's very true to life. You never get to just start one story and then finish that story.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true.
There's always some other story in there.
All right, so the first story begins then in chapter 5, verse 21. Jesus crossed the lake again, and on the other side a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Jairus, one of the synagogue leaders, came forward. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded with him, "My daughter is about to die. Please come and place your hands on her so that she can be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. So Jesus lands on the shore, and immediately there's a large crowd there, but one person, Jairus, gets Jesus' attention. He's said to be a synagogue leader. Any thoughts about this fellow Jairus, the synagogue leader, what that means?
I mean, so in the Jewish annotated New Testament, which is the commentary that I read, it suggests that he probably is not a rabbi, but like a lay leader, just sort of,
right.
Someone who's integral in the congregation, maybe locks and unlocks the building, like we all have those folks in our congregation. And that seems reasonable to me because they don't call him a rabbi and they don't call him a Pharisee. Yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah, it seems likely to me that he's not part of the rabbinate. Part of the power structure,
So of all these folks, Jairus is the one who gets Jesus' attention. I'm not sure what to make of that. I mean, Jairus is clearly somebody who's respected in the community. Like, he's a leader of the synagogue in a Jewish setting. People know who he is. People look up to him. We might imagine that he's somebody of some, not just standing in the community, but probably of some economic status. We're going to see at the very end of the story that his daughter seems to have her own room in his house. Like, in my mind, I imagine Jairus as carrying some privilege with him, both economic and status-wise. I mean, it doesn't say so, but I mean, it just says he came forward. But I kind of imagine the crowd kind of deferring to him a little bit. Like, oh, Jairus is in need of help, so he gets the floor. I don't know what you think. Like, that is just in my sanctified imagination, to borrow a phrase, that I see that. But your thoughts? Like, can we read into Jairus that way, do you think?
I guess what I was picturing was that the people knew sort of the urgency of his situation. And, he says, my little daughter is at the point of death.
Yeah.
And he falls at Jesus's feet. I mean, I guess I felt this sort of urgency about his situation that maybe if he's really active in the synagogue, other people know.
So his situation, all we know, all he says is, "My daughter is about to die. Please come and place your hands on her so that she can be healed and live." Mm-hmm. And that's enough. Like, there's no more conversation. Jesus just
says, okay.
Goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So this is where we get an interruption in the story. So thousands and thousands of people are around. We find out in the second half of verse 24, a swarm of people were following Jesus, crowding in on him. So this whole group is like pressing on with Jesus. And there's just people all around. So then in verse 25, a woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a lot under the care of many doctors and had spent everything she had without getting any better. In fact, she had gotten worse. What are your thoughts initially about her?
My first thought, honestly, is what is the ailment that she has, right? You know, in the NRSV, it says hemorrhages. Yours just says, she's been bleeding for 12 years. Probably means, I would assume, something related to menstrual cycles, like endometriosis or something that just makes your cycles go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Like I have friends now who suffer from endometriosis, and you would never know the amount of pain that they endure. Like, their doctors recommend having their appendix removed because if it exploded, they wouldn't know because that's a normal level of pain for them. So just to see it so I don't know if the issue with this woman is pain or the sort of ritual purity issues that come with bleeding all the time. It's not something we talk about all the time, but like there are some challenges that come with walking through the world with a uterus, and this woman's got one of them, and I appreciate that this gospel sees her.
Yeah, there's a critique here of healthcare kind of in its own way, where she apparently had some money at some point because she was able to keep going to doctors, but none of them could heal her, and she hasn't gotten any better, but she's gotten worse.
Right.
And the text says she's spent everything she had. Mm-hmm. So now she's poor, even though she wasn't initially poor, but she's become poor in the interest of trying to have healing for her condition. Mm-hmm. We do get there's a reference in Leviticus 15, just says whenever a woman has a bloody discharge for a long time, the duration of her unclean discharge will be like the period of her menstruation. She will be unclean. Well, while we don't really know the details of this particular bleeding, I think you have to imagine that there is a ritual purity issue that is alongside all the other things.
Right. And as we've been talking about with a lot of the ritual purity issues, it's not that the Hebrew Bible envisions there's anything wrong or sinful or evil about any of this. Like, this is all a natural part of life, right? Like, people with uteruses menstruate. That's what is typical, but there is some separation from society that happens during that time. It's not as extreme as, when someone has leprosy or whatever, but there are spaces you can't go into, and there are things you can't do in the biblical imagination and during that time. And so if it goes on forever, then that's really isolating.
Yeah, because part of the issue with ritual impurity in Leviticus is that it is transferable from one person to another by touch.
Right.
Right. So if you have an impurity due to this flow of blood or any of the other things that cause one to be impure, you have to stay away from people. Like, you're not supposed to be around people because you might transmit impurity to them and they wouldn't know it. And then they could go into the presence of God and the impurity would go with them unaware. Mm-hmm. So we're not told really about her social situation, but for 12 years, presumably she has been kind of kept apart from her community. Then in verse 27, we're told, because she had heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothes. She was thinking, if I can just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Her bleeding stopped immediately, and she sensed in her body that her illness had been healed. Her healing has already occurred. The bleeding has stopped. She sensed that her illness had been healed, and Jesus hasn't even turned around yet. So it happens without him.
But I mean, it's pretty audacious, like, that she just is like, I'm going to take matters into my own hands here.
Yeah.
That's bold.
It is bold. And I mean, she is bold, but she's also being a little furtive, right? Like she touches him and then kind of, we're going to see disappears into the crowd. Presumably because she's, not supposed to be probably in the crowd being impure. And then she's certainly not supposed to be touching him just as a man. And she's not supposed to be touching other people. So like she's done something that is kind of, it's risky in its own way. And so she's trying to keep it on the down low.
That's so interesting because I hadn't thought about whether the people around her would know her situation.
Yeah, that's true.
Or not. But maybe they do. Like maybe they do.
Yeah, that's a good point because I kind of think of it as like, it's not a big place, right? Like
Right. No, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and she's been dealing with this for 12 years and she's spent all her money in. I just kind of assume that people will know who she is. But you're right, like it doesn't really say.
No, I think you're probably right though.
So in verse 30, at that very moment, so she touches him, she knows she's been healed. At that very moment, Jesus recognized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "Don't you see this crowd pressing against you, yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus looked around carefully to see who had done it. The woman, full of fear and trembling, came forward. Knowing what had happened to her, she fell down in front of Jesus and told him the whole truth. He responded, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace, healed from your disease." It is so interesting to me that Jesus, it's in the perfect tense there, like his power had gone out from him.
Yeah.
So he notices it after it has happened. And so we were talking about that a minute ago, but it seems as though Jesus did not have intent to heal her.
Yeah.
But it is his power that healed her, but he didn't decide to do that. It just, the touch made it happen. And he kind of recognizes it as soon as it happened. Oh my gosh, this power went out from me. So Jesus stops and says, "Who touched my clothes?" We don't have any stage directions here about what his tone of voice is.
Oh, he's grumpy.
You think so?
Yes. He doesn't want people grabbing at him.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I keep picturing these like scenes of, old TV footage of like the Beatles and people trying to, get little whatever. They've dropped a dirty tissue and now you want that tissue, like that kind of celebrity. And you don't want those people grabbing on you. It's overwhelming. What do you think? You don't think he's grumpy?
What I think is that for Jesus, the physical healing is a partial healing. I don't mean that she's only partially healed physically. I mean, she is fully healed.
No, I know what you mean, but there's another step that still has to happen.
The physical healing is not the end of what she needs, because there is this fracture of community, there is this loss of family, there's this loss of relationship. And so Jesus, I think, is pausing to acknowledge her. Yeah, acknowledge her publicly, like in front of other people, and, like just acknowledge the relationship. Jesus calls her daughter in verse 34 once she's kind of come and talked to him. And, if we imagine that she is a woman who has lost her familial relationships because of this long illness, then just in that one word, Jesus has kind of restored a family to her. In a not in a biological way, obviously, but in a spiritual way, like welcome into the family of Jesus. So I see Jesus pausing as being about the importance of the restoration of her community and her relationships and her family. And Jesus doesn't want to let the moment go, because he knows that for whoever needed healing, that the physical healing was only one step in the process.
That makes a lot of sense in terms of her stepping back into the community and sort of healing that piece of things. That if people don't know the healing has happened, like she felt immediately in her body that she was healed.
Yeah.
But not to have a sort of, ritual, public acknowledgement of that would make it harder to reintegrate.
Yeah. Okay,
so I love the disciples question.
Yeah.
I love the disciples. It's great. It's like traveling with the Three Stooges. It's wonderful. So they say like, well, how are we supposed to know who touched your clothes? You see all these people here?
Yeah.
Like it could have been anybody.
Yeah.
And that actually sort of had me wondering, like, she touched him intentionally, but do we think that others didn't touch him given how the crowd pressed upon him? Like, what was different in her touch?
I don't know if that comes back to the intentionality of the woman. Like, she believes that Jesus can heal her, and she takes initiative to go. I mean, what she really does is claim a healing for herself.
Yeah.
She doesn't ask permission for a healing. She just goes and she says, I claim this healing. I mean, she doesn't say it, but she enacts it.
She enacts it.
And power goes out. And I mean, maybe that's why Jesus turns around, is somebody had enough faith, enough guts to actually draw healing power from him without his intent. And he wants to know about that. That might be possible.
That's so interesting, because the other question in this section that I noted is, in my translation, Jesus says at the end, your faith has made you well.
Yeah.
And I sort of wrote in the margins, like, did it? Because if she just stayed at home and had faith, like, she kind of had to touch the magic cloak. But what you're saying is that it's like a combination, right? Like, she had to have the faith and act on it in this particular way.
Yeah, and, the word faith there is doing a lot of work. And oftentimes, at least in my experience in the Christian tradition, faith and belief have become kind of like synonyms, like that faith is a cognitive process where somebody believes Jesus is the Son of God or whatever. But faith, in my mind, really is more like having trust that your actions will, like, putting your trust into action. And so, so for me, your faith has healed you is referring to both the, like, she believed it in her heart, and also she believes it enough to act on it, and therein her faith has healed her.
I really like that.
I love the disciples there too, and the disciples are definitely grumpy, and part of it, I think you're right, is that Jesus is being jostled in a crowd, and so, like, anybody literally could have touched him. The second is, it's easy to lose track in the story of the fact that what is happening right now is Jesus is on his way to save the daughter of a synagogue leader who is close to death.
Yeah.
And he has paused in the middle of a crowd to seek out a woman who has touched him when the healing has already happened. Like, what does it matter? There doesn't seem to be any clear benefit from pausing and asking, but there are obvious costs,
right,
in terms of wasting time. Like, part of me thinks, like, yeah, the disciples are actually right here in that sense. Like, you're in a big crowd, people are pressing in, like, we don't have time for this stuff, Jesus. And yet Jesus still thinks, for whatever reason, acknowledging this woman, calling her daughter, telling her to go in peace, like, that's worth the loss of time.
Have you heard, I'm sure you have, about this? It was like a study done several years ago, and they were trying to look at what causes people to stop and help someone in need and when they walk by. And they did the study at a divinity school somewhere, and they were, like, studying people who were on the path to become pastors. And they had half of them preparing to give a sermon on, I think, like the Good Samaritan text, I think it was. And then half of them, I don't know, were not doing that. And so they were on their way to get, to class to, like, give a presentation, to give either their sermon or some other presentation. And someone asked them for help along the way. And so the researchers' question was, do the people who are studying that particular text, are they more likely to stop because they have that text in their mind?
That's interesting.
And the answer was no. The factor that seemed most influential in whether people stopped to help was whether they perceived that they had time or whether they thought they'd be late.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so that really comes into my mind in this, because there's a lot of urgency. Like, we haven't gotten to the next part of it yet, but we find out sort of just how close to death this daughter was.
Yeah. There
was a lot of time urgency. So it makes sense what you're saying, that the disciples would be like, move it along. Like, like we're going somewhere to do something good and important, and we need to do it, and we can't stop and help this other person.
So we learn in verse 35 While Jesus was still speaking with her, that is the woman, messengers came from the synagogue leader's house, saying to Jairus, "Your daughter has died. Why bother the teacher any longer?" Jesus overheard their report and said to the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, just keep trusting." Thoughts about that little interaction?
My translation is slightly different. I mean, it's the same idea, but it says, "Do not fear, only believe." So the note that I wrote next to it was, believe what? Like, believe a miracle is possible, believe Jesus will heal this child.
The word there in Greek is pisteo, which is the verbal form of that word we were just talking about, having faith, pistis. So that same issue that I was talking about before of, is it a cognitive process or is it an active process? You can see that in the difference in those two translations, NRSV and CEB. Just believe, only believe sort of implies just like, still, think that Jesus, keep trusting says like, just like,
keep moving.
Keep moving, it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I really think, there's probably like, if you could figure out a way to mush those two ideas together, I think that's probably really what this verb means.
No, I like that a lot.
Yeah. If I were Jairus, I would be angry because Jesus was on his way to my house for my little girl. And not only did he heal somebody whose wound was, or whatever, whose illness was less urgent, but he then paused for no apparent reason to talk to her and have this whole conversation, like seek her out and have this whole conversation. And my daughter died in the process. I would be really angry and upset about that.
Right. Those 5 minutes mattered.
Those 5 minutes mattered a lot. Now, Jesus is, then the story goes on in verse 37. Jesus didn't allow anyone to follow him except Peter, James, and John, James's brother. They came to the synagogue leader's house, and he saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "What's all this commotion and crying about? The child isn't dead. She's only sleeping." They laughed at him, but he threw them all out. Then taking the child's parents and his disciples with him, he went to the room where the child was. Taking her hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Young woman, get up." Suddenly the young woman got up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. They were shocked. He gave them strict orders that no one should know what had happened. Then he told them to give her something to eat. There's a lot going on in that little section. Yeah. But what were you drawn to?
I was drawn there. I guess there are two things I was drawn to sort of most immediately. One was sort of this back and forth that we have with when things are supposed to be private, like when a healing is supposed to be private and when a healing is supposed to be public.
Yeah.
Or like talked about, right? He just did this healing of the demoniac and said, like, go out and tell everyone this happened.
Yeah.
And in this case, he kicks everyone out. He tells them she's not dead.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he thinks they're going to believe that, but so that he can say, I didn't raise her from the dead.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. She was sleeping.
The language that Jesus uses of she's not dead, she's only sleeping is on the narrative side of the resurrection just means exactly what it seems to say. Like he's saying, no, you have misdiagnosed her. She looks like she's dead.
Right.
She's fine. Like I'm just going to go.
Y'all are crying for no reason. Yeah.
Post-resurrection, that language of sleeping in the early Christian tradition becomes a metaphor for resurrection. So those who are asleep will awake. It becomes a metaphor for those who have died will be resurrected. And so if you have resurrection ears, like post-resurrection ears when you're reading this text, you know what he's talking about. But before the resurrection, you don't know what he's talking about. So he hasn't exactly misrepresented the situation. He has just spoken with his own resurrection as the key, which nobody has access to in the story. All right, Amy. So I'm really curious when you read these two stories kind of sandwiched together, intercalated here, and you're thinking about contemporary life and interpretation for our own time. What kinds of things are you thinking about?
I'm thinking a lot about the sort of literal, physical healings that occur in these stories and wondering about how the stories live in the Christian community, sort of in the face of the fact that we don't all have access to that kind of literal physical healing.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know if you remember this conversation, but a conversation we had many, many years ago. And I think we were talking about Jesus's message not to fear anything, including death, right?
Yeah.
And I really liked that message. But but then for me, it was sort of like, well, don't fear death because death is only sleeping.
Yeah.
That sort of ruined it for me. Like, I wish there was an easier way to put that message, like, right together with death is real and you're going to die.
Yeah.
And to figure out how not to be afraid of it without negating it.
Yeah.
So somehow that comes together in my mind with these stories of healing. Like, physical suffering is real.
Yeah.
And many of us are not going to get out of it. And some people get a really unfair portion of it.
Yeah.
And so how do we read these stories knowing that?
That's a really great question. And I'm curious when you say that the idea of resurrection negates death. Is that what you were saying? Calling it sleeping means it's not real?
Yeah, I guess that's how I've interpreted it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to that, but the doctrine of resurrection, differently than the belief in the immortality of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
So the immortality of the soul negates death in, like, there's a part of you that never dies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the New Testament believes that. I think the New Testament believes that people die and that God has the power to resurrect people on the other side of death. But your question of, like, how do you read miracles when we all know full well that miracles don't always happen?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe rarely happen, or maybe never happen. Like, we ask for healing and we're not healed. People
or not in this way. Like,
Yeah.
maybe there are ways that healing can happen sort of between a person and, like, a rupture in a community or a rupture in a family or something like that. But these are there's more to these healings than that.
Yeah. What I think the New Testament is doing, what Mark is doing, is lengthening the timeline. And so the things that happen here and now are not the end of the story. The end of the story is that life triumphs over death. And either you have faith that that is true or you don't. And so the things that happen in this life are difficult, terrible, painful. And that's the way that is.
Mm-hmm.
But the gospel message is, and yet we have hope. And so you're sort of hoping in the face of things that are not very hopeful.
Or we have faith,
Yeah.
right? We
Faith,
have
trust.
that belief-action
Yep.
combination.
Yep. We live as though there is life on the other side of death. Mm-hmm.
What you got, Bobby?
I mean, you can kind of tell that I'm sort of interested in Jairus. And part of the reason I'm interested in Jairus is because I feel like he carries with him a lot of privilege in a way that somebody like me carries a lot of privilege. So he is a religious leader in a Jewish context. He's a male in a patriarchal society. He seems to be wealthy in a world where people are poor. He commands respect in his community where other people don't. And so, being who he is, you would expect that he is accustomed to people prioritizing him.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he comes to the shore and when Jesus comes to the shore and Jairus is there, initially Jesus does prioritize him. He picks him out of the whole crowd and says, I'm coming to your house. And then this woman comes along who bears no marks of privilege. She's a woman. Mm-hmm. She's spent all her money. She is in pain. She's ill. She's impure. She has been separated from the community. And so in the way that privilege works, Jesus ought to keep going with Jairus and leave her be, especially since she's already healed. But in this text, Jesus pauses and makes Jairus wait so he can acknowledge her, call her daughter, commend her faith, and say publicly that she has been healed so she can be restored to the community. All the while, Jairus, the man of privilege, is just standing there waiting, and then his daughter dies. Like the worst thing he can imagine happens to him. Mm-hmm. And only after all of this delay does Jairus' daughter get healed. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the way that I kind of relate to that is there is something about being a person of privilege in a world where there's a lot of suffering and isolation and illness, that people like me need to recognize that our needs are not always the most important, even when they're really important. Mm-hmm. But that there are times when not just the healing of other people, but the recognition of the full humanity of other people, the restoration of their community, is more important than the thing that I think is important. So I think Jesus is doing something really interesting here, or at least Mark is doing something really interesting here by the way these two stories are told, about saying, hey, you person who's used to things revolving around you, there are people whom the world never revolves around that are as important, maybe more important than you are. I don't know. You can tell my thoughts are not fully formed there, but there's something there about putting your agenda to the side.
I think there is, and I think it makes me really appreciate your observation earlier that Jairus doesn't seem to have, he doesn't fly into a rage. Yeah. He doesn't try to press Jesus to go faster. He doesn't, whatever incredibly intense emotion and fear he may be feeling that may be sort of magnified by the fact that if he has had a life of privilege, he is accustomed to being able to control things a little bit better.
Yeah.
And, he has successfully gotten Jesus' attention and gotten him to say he will come. And so he may think that, great, I've got the situation under control. But it just is sort of this last reminder that, you are not driving this train.
Yes.
And you are used to driving the train.
That's right.
Or thinking you're driving the train.
Yeah, that's it.
Driving the train. Yeah.
Good things.
There's some good stories. And 2 women, too. I love it.
2 women, and my takeaway is about.
And you want to talk about Jairus? I know.
Yeah.
No, that's good stuff.
Yeah. All right, Amy. Well, thanks for this conversation. Next week, we will be back as Bible Worm and Bible Worm, reading the Bible. Bible Worm.
That's beautiful.
Really I've been practicing. Hopefully, we will not lose anyone in the process, but if we lose you, don't give up on us. We will have a website.
Don't fear, but trust. And fear. Look for Bible Worm.
Bible Worm is just sleeping. If you lose us, you can find us hopefully at BibleWormPodcast.com or on Facebook at Facebook.com/BibleWormPodcast. And if you find us in the Narrative Lectionary group, we will still be posting there. So please be a little persistent, and your patience will be. I don't know if it'll be
richly rewarded.
Yeah, there'll be a podcast there for whatever it's worth. I've learned not to promise too much with our podcast because you never know. You never know. Do you know what we're talking about next week? Speaking of not knowing,
we keep right on going. We are in Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 29. The death of John the Baptist.
Oh,
that sounds intense.
Yeah. There's 3 different stories it's going to be one of them days where we got
to focus.
3 big old stories that we got to get through in a 30-minute podcast. Mm-hmm.
Bible Worm can do anything.
Bible Worm.
All right. Always a pleasure, Bobby, and y'all have a great week.
All right.
See you next week at Bible Worm.
See you next time.
Bye.
This has been another episode of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary podcast for people on the go. Join us next week when we change our name to Bible Worm and read Mark chapter 6. We'll explore the stories of Jesus' rejection in his hometown, the mission of the 12, and the beheading of John the Baptist. Look for us at BibleWormPodcast.com, Facebook.com/BibleWormPodcast, or with any luck, we'll just show up in your feed like usual. We'll see you then.